When I was 11 years old, my own father sold me for a plate of food. The man who bought me was my own brother. Yes, there are certain stories we keep inside for so long that they begin to rot within us. Today, at 82 years old, I've finally decided to release what I've been carrying for more than 7 decades. Good morning to everyone watching. My name is Teresa Alves Collins, but everyone here in Ashland, Kentucky knows me as Miss Terry the Baker, because of the cakes and cookies I've been selling at the farmer's market since I was old enough to work. If you've ever passed through the Saturday market here in town, you've probably seen me there, a skinny old lady with white hair pulled back in a bun, with a smile on my face that hides stories no one could ever imagine. I was born in 1942 in a small wooden house on the outskirts of town, which back then wasn't even half the size it is today. It was a difficult time, the world at war overseas, and here in our Appalachian hills, a daily struggle for survival. My mother, Sarah, was a quiet woman, of few words and many sighs. My father, Anthony, worked as a construction helper when there was work, and did odd jobs when there wasn't, which was most of the time. I was the baby of the family, the runt of the litter, as they said. My oldest brother, Gerald, was 24 when I was born. Imagine that. He could easily have been my father. The middle one, Claude, was 12 years older than me. It was like I was from a different generation, an accident along the way, as I once heard my father grumble when he thought I was asleep. If you're enjoying this story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and leave a comment down below. It can be your name, the town where you live, your age, or whether you have children or grandchildren. This old, curious woman loves knowing how far my voice can reach on this internet that my grandchildren taught me to use. Thanks for keeping me company. Back to my story. Gerald, my oldest brother, left home when I was still a baby. He went to Detroit to seek a better life, and we only saw him occasionally when he'd show up in a borrowed car, bringing some gifts and telling stories from the big city that made my father's eyes shine with pride. But it was Claude, the middle child, who was the real pride of the family. I need to explain something important. Claude wasn't my mother's son. He was the product of my father's first marriage to a woman who died in childbirth. My mother raised him as if he were her own, with all the love in the world. But Claude never reciprocated that. He had a cold, calculating manner, always looking at her as if she were a stranger who had invaded his house. From an early age, I noticed Claude was different. While my mother treated him and Gerald the same, my father made a point of showing that Claude was special. "This boy will go far," he kept repeating. And he did. Claude was intelligent. I can't deny that. He studied like nobody else, won a scholarship to the Catholic school, then got into law school. He was the first in our family to set foot in a university. Our house was very simple. Red clay dirt floor that my mother swept 3 times a day to maintain dignity. Walls made of wood that my father had put up himself. A roof that let in sunlight through the cracks on clear days, and leaks when the rain came hard. We didn't have a bathroom inside. It was an outhouse in the backyard, just a pit toilet. The water came from a well that dried up during drought times, and we had oil lamps for light until I was about 8, when electricity finally reached our street. In contrast, Claude, after he graduated, went to live in an apartment downtown. It had a living room, bedroom, tiled kitchen, and a bathroom with a hot shower. The first time I visited, I spent hours under that shower, feeling the hot water, a sensation I had never experienced before. My mother pulled me out of there, embarrassed, and Claude gave that laugh of his, a laugh that never reached his eyes. "Looks like she's never seen water before, this girl," he said to his friends who were there. Everyone laughed. I was 7 years old and didn't yet fully understand humiliation. Claude worked in a law firm and, according to my father, made more money in a month than we see in a year, but he rarely helped at home. Once in a while he'd bring a food basket or pay some overdue bill, always making a point of announcing the favor in front of everyone as if he were throwing crumbs to birds. My mother, poor thing, worked as a washerwoman. She would leave the house before sunrise with huge bundles of clothes on her head, go to the creek to wash the clothes of the fine ladies in town, and return at the end of the day with her hands red and cracked, but always with a tired smile on her face when she saw me. "My little princess," she would say, "did you study well today?" Studying was the rule in our house. My father couldn't read, could barely sign his name, but he insisted that I go to school every day. "If you want to be somebody in life, you have to study," he repeated, pointing to Claude's example. "Look at your brother, a graduate lawyer, while your father here is a nobody." I tried hard. I was a good student, liked math and listening to the stories that Miss Dorothy told. At school, for a few hours, I could forget about the poverty, the cramped house, the food that sometimes wasn't there. I could dream of a different future, but real life always came back. When I was 9, a severe drought began in the region. My father's construction work diminished, the fine ladies started washing their own clothes to save money, and our situation, which was already difficult, became desperate. I remember one night when there was absolutely nothing to eat at home. My mother heated water with salt and gave it to me, saying it was soup. I drank it, pretending to believe her, while I watched her and my father subsist on weak, sugarless coffee. It was during this time that I noticed something was changing in the way Claude looked at me. I had grown quite a bit, was starting to become a young lady, as my mother said. When he came to visit, he always found a way to be alone with me, to ask strange questions, to touch my hair or face in a way that made me uncomfortable. "This girl is turning into a pretty young woman," he commented to my father, who swelled with pride. "Takes after her mother," he responded, looking fondly at my mother in one of the rare moments when he showed affection for her. I didn't quite understand what was happening, but I had a bad feeling. A knot in my stomach every time Claude appeared at the house. I avoided being near him, made up excuses to go play at the neighbor's house when I knew he would come. My body knew something that my child's mind didn't yet comprehend. The situation at home kept getting worse. When I was 10, my mother fell ill. It started with a cough that wouldn't go away. Then came fever, fatigue, difficulty breathing. Tuberculosis, they said at the clinic. She needed expensive medicine, good nutrition, absolute rest. 3 things we couldn't give her. My father aged 10 years in a matter of months. By day, he went out desperately looking for any work, carrying sacks at the market, cleaning yards, doing anything that came up. At night, he sat beside the bed where my mother was wasting away, holding her hand, tears silently streaming down his face, marked by the sun and by suffering. I took care of the house as best I could. I stopped going to school to stay with my mother, gave her medicine at the right times, when we had the medicine, cooked what little there was, washed clothes, as I had learned from her. At 10 years old, I was already a miniature adult, carrying responsibilities too big for my thin shoulders. It was during this period that Gerald, my oldest brother, completely disappeared. We heard from acquaintances that he had gotten involved with gambling in Detroit, owed money to dangerous people, and had fled to Montana. My father, already carrying the weight of my mother's illness, seemed even more bent with this news. "Only Claude is left," he muttered, looking at the portrait of his lawyer son that we had on the living room wall, the only framed photo in the house. "Only Claude can help us now." I trembled inside every time I heard this. Something told me that asking Claude for help would come at too high a price. But I was just a child, and my voice carried no weight in family decisions. The situation kept deteriorating. The landlord threatened to evict us for non-payment. My mother's medicine ran out, and we had no money to buy more. Food was increasingly scarce. I had already gone a whole day without eating anything but a piece of stale bread with coffee when my father finally made the decision that would change our lives forever. "I'm going to talk to your brother," he said, putting on his worn hat. "He can't leave his own family in this misery." I wanted to beg him not to go, wanted to say we would find another way, wanted to scream that I was afraid of what Claude might ask in return. But the words didn't come out. I could only watch my father walk out the door, his shoulders drooping, the wounded dignity of a man who found himself forced to beg for help from his own son. What I didn't know at that moment, as I watched my father move away down the dirt road, was that this walk would seal my fate, that his desperation, mixed with my half-brother's calculated evil, would open an abyss under my child's feet, an abyss from which it would take me decades to escape. My father returned at night from Claude's house. He came back different. He had a look I had never seen before, a mixture of shame, anger, and defeat that made my heart tighten in a way I didn't know was possible. He didn't say anything, just sat on the kitchen stool, took off his hat, and stared at nothing. as if he were seeing things I couldn't see. "Dad?" I called softly, serving him a glass of water. "Is Claude going to help us?" He took the glass with trembling hands, took a sip, then looked at me in a strange way, as if he were seeing me for the first time. "Yes," he answered, his voice so low I could barely hear. "But not today. Tomorrow he's coming here to talk to us." Something in the way he said it gave me chills. Why would Claude come to our house? He always avoided our shack, as he called it, saying it was stuffy, that it smelled of mold, that he might catch some disease. And now, suddenly, he was willing to come? That night was the longest of my life until then. My mother coughing in the bedroom, my father sitting in the dark living room, refusing food, refusing conversation, just smoking one cigarette after another, a luxury we couldn't afford, but that someone, Claude, I presumed, had given him. And me, restless, with a bad feeling that wouldn't let me sleep. The next morning, my father left early, said he was going to try to find some work at the market. I stayed alone taking care of my mother, who seemed a little better that day. She even managed to sit up in bed and eat some cornmeal mush I prepared. "Where's your father, child?" she asked, her voice weak. "He went looking for work," I replied, avoiding mentioning Claude's visit. I didn't want to worry her more than she already was. It was around noon when I heard the sound of a car stopping in front of the house. A car on our dirt road where most people didn't even have bicycles. It could only be Claude. I ran to the window and there he was, getting out of a new, shiny, metallic blue car. He wore a light-colored suit, gleaming shoes, his hair combed back with brilliantine. He looked like a movie star amid that dusty street, with chickens scratching around and barefoot children looking on admiringly. My heart raced. Where was my father? Why had Claude come precisely when he wasn't here? I thought about not opening the door, but what choice did I have? He was my brother, our only hope of getting my mother's medicine, of avoiding eviction. "Teresa, open this door for your brother," he shouted from outside, knocking hard. His voice had a tone I had never heard before, a mixture of authority and something else that, only years later, I would recognize as lust. I opened the door with trembling hands. Claude entered, filling our simple house with his strong cologne, his expensive cigar, his imposing presence. He looked around with contempt, as he always did. "Where's Anthony?" he asked, referring to my father by name, never as Dad. "He went looking for work," I replied, my voice small. A strange smile appeared on his face. "Excellent. So we have time to talk, you and I." He sat on our only sofa, an old patched-up piece of furniture that had been donated by one of my mother's employers. He opened a leather briefcase he was carrying and took out some papers. "You can read properly, right, Teresa?" he asked, handing me the papers. I nodded, taking the documents carefully. They were medical bills, pharmacy receipts, the lease for our house with several overdue months marked in red. On each paper, stamps of urgent and final notice seemed to shout at me. "Your father asked me to take on all these debts," explained Claude, blowing out cigar smoke. "It's almost 2 months of my salary. That's not a small amount." I remained silent, not knowing what to say. He continued. "I agreed to help, of course. We're family, aren't we?" There was something in the way he said family that gave me chills. "But you know, Teresa, nothing in this life is free. Everything has its price." "What do you want in return?" I asked, surprising myself with the courage to ask this direct question. Claude smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He moved closer to me, sitting beside me on the sofa, so close that I could feel the heat of his body, the strong smell of his cologne mixed with the cigar. "You're turning into a very pretty young lady, did you know?" he said, running his hand through my hair in a way that left me paralyzed with fear. "You must already know some things about life, right? Things that happen between men and women?" I swallowed hard, my heart beating so fast that I thought he could hear it. I was 11 years old, lived in a poor but decent family. I knew the basics about how babies were born, things I had heard from the older girls at school, but nothing beyond that. I don't know what you're talking about," I stammered, trying to move away, but he held my arm firmly. "Don't play innocent," he muttered, his face now close to mine. "Your father and I have already talked. He understands that I need a compensation for my sacrifice, and you are the only thing of value this family has to offer." At that moment, The front door opened and my father came in. His face was ashen, deep circles under his eyes, red eyes as if he had been crying or drinking. Perhaps both. He looked at us, at Claude's hand still holding my arm, and averted his gaze as if he couldn't bear what he saw. "Ah, Anthony, you arrived just in time," said Claude, releasing my arm and standing up. "I was just explaining to Teresa how we're going to resolve your situation." My father didn't answer, just sat in the kitchen chair, his body bent as if carrying the weight of the world. "I brought Sarah's medicine," continued Claude, taking out a pharmacy bag from his suit pocket. "And this is the money for the overdue rent, plus 3 months in advance." He placed a wad of bills on the table. "There's also a credit at Mr. Johnson's grocery store. He's already been notified. You can get what you need for a month." My father looked at the money, at the medicine, then at me. I saw something break inside him, something that, once broken, would never be repaired. "The agreement," he muttered, his voice choked. "Just once. You promised." Claude gave a short laugh, without humor. Of course. For now. But you know that the debts continue, don't you? Your wife will need treatment for months. The rent needs to be paid every month. You need to eat." My father lowered his head, defeated. I looked from one to the other, not fully understanding what was happening, but with enough fear to keep me paralyzed, unable to flee or scream. "Teresa," my father finally said without looking at me. Go with your brother. He's going to take you for a ride." "I don't want to go," I replied, my voice trembling. "I want to stay with Mom." "Go with him!" my father suddenly shouted, startling me. He had never shouted at me before. His eyes were full of tears, his whole body was shaking. "Please, daughter, just do what he tells you." Claude smiled, victorious, and took my hand. "Let's go, Teresa. I'll take you to my house. There we can talk better." I looked one last time at my father, silently begging for help, for protection. But he just turned his face away, unable to face what he was doing. What happened next, that afternoon at Claude's house, is something I spent decades trying to forget. The details are etched in my memory like hot iron brands. But I do not want to, describe them in words. I can only say that on that day, in 1953, I lost not only my innocence, but also my faith in humanity, my trust in the people who should protect me, my very notion of who I was. I remember returning home at dusk, feeling that my body no longer belonged to me. I remember the sepulchral silence when I entered, the way my father couldn't look at me, how my mother, even sick, realized that something terrible had happened just by seeing my face. "What happened, my daughter?" she asked, concern momentarily overcoming the weakness of the disease. "What did Claude do to you?" I couldn't answer. The words simply wouldn't come. I just lay down beside her on the bed, curled up like an injured animal, and cried until I had no more tears. In the days that followed, we lived in a strange, silent agreement. My father used Claude's money to pay the overdue rent, buy food, give the medicine to my mother. She slowly began to improve, a little color returning to her face, the cough diminishing. But there was a shadow in our house now, a heavy secret that poisoned the air we breathed. My mother tried several times to discover what had happened. She wasn't foolish, she knew something serious had occurred. But I couldn't speak, and my father would change the subject, leave the room whenever the matter came up. "Claude is helping us," was all he would say. "We should be grateful." Gratitude had a price, and that price was me. Every couple of weeks or so, Claude would appear at the house. He would bring more money, more medicine, sometimes some gift to disguise, a used radio, a dress for my mother, and he would take away a piece of my soul. My father was never at home when Claude came to get me. He would leave early, return late, often drunk. It was his way of dealing with the guilt, I suppose. My mother, as she improved, began to notice the pattern. Claude's visits, my departures, my always silent return, with downcast eyes, often with marks on my body that I tried to hide. One night, about 3 months after the first visit, I heard my parents arguing in the backyard. My mother, still weak, but now able to walk around the house, was confronting my father for the first time in all their years of marriage. "What have you done, Anthony?" she was shouting, her voice hoarse from the disease making the shout even more frightening. "What have you let that demon do to our daughter?" "I had no choice," my father responded, his voice choked by alcohol and crying. "You were going to die, Sarah. We were going to be on the street. What did you want me to do?" "Anything but this. My God in heaven, Anthony, she's a child, our daughter." The argument continued into the night. I pretended to be asleep, but heard every word, every accusation, every pathetic excuse. At some point, my mother came into the room, sat on the edge of my bed and stroked my hair, thinking I was asleep. "Forgive me, my daughter," she whispered, her voice broken by crying. "Forgive me for not protecting you." The next morning, something had changed. My mother, even still convalescing, got up early, put on the best clothes she had, and called me. "We're going out," she said, with a determination I hadn't seen in months. "Where to?" I asked, confused. "The sheriff's office," she replied simply. "We're going to report your brother." My heart raced with fear. "Mom, we can't. He's a lawyer. He knows everyone important in town. Nobody will believe us." "We'll try," she insisted. "I can't let this continue. I'd rather die without medicine than see my daughter being... She couldn't complete the sentence, tears preventing the words. But I understood, and for the first time in months, I felt a tiny bit of hope. Someone was willing to defend me. Someone believed that what was happening was wrong, regardless of the circumstances. Little did we know how naive we were being. We arrived at the sheriff's office, a small, dilapidated building downtown. Sheriff Blackwell was a corpulent man with a thick mustache and small eyes. He received us impatiently, clearly annoyed at having to deal with two poor women early in the morning. "What do you want?" he asked, without offering a chair or water. My mother, trembling but determined, told our story. She told about the illness, the debts, the agreement my father had made with Claude. She told about what he had been doing to me. As she spoke, the sheriff's face changed, not from indignation, as we had hoped, but from disbelief to irritation. "Are you accusing Mr. Claude Alves?" he interrupted, his voice hard. "Judge Hawkins' lawyer? The mayor's advisor?" "I'm accusing a man who is abusing my 11-year-old daughter," my mother responded, her courage growing with anger. The sheriff laughed, a dry laugh, without humor, that chilled me to the bone. "Ma'am, I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that absurd accusation. Mr. Claude is a respected man in this town. You and this girl," he pointed at me with contempt, "are what? Nobody. No offense, but who would believe you?" "He is abusing my daughter," my mother repeated, her voice rising. "It's a crime. You're the law. You have to do something." The sheriff stood up, his face red with anger. "The only thing I'm going to do is send you back home before I decide to arrest you for slander and defamation. Mr. Claude is my personal friend, understand? He helped me when my son had problems with the law. I won't allow a washerwoman and her daughter to try to tarnish his reputation." We left the sheriff's office defeated, humiliated. My mother cried silently beside me as we walked back home. "Let's get out of here," she said suddenly, stopping in the middle of the street. "Let's go far away, Teresa. Me, you, and your father if he wants to come. Away from this place. Away from Claude." "Where to?" I asked, a thread of hope lighting up again. "I don't know. Chicago, maybe. I have a cousin there. Or Detroit. Any place where he can't find us." That idea of escape, of a new beginning away from Claude's clutches, gave me strength. I spent the rest of the day helping my mother plan our escape. We gathered what little money we had hidden, separated the few clothes that would be worth taking, made a small bundle with the essentials. When my father came home at night, my mother confronted him with our plan. "We're leaving, Anthony," she announced. "Me and Teresa. You come with us or stay. The choice is yours." My father, surprisingly sober that night, listened to everything in silence. When my mother finished speaking, he looked at me, then at her, and finally spoke. "We can't." "What do you mean, we can't?" my mother exploded. "Of course we can. We'll take a bus tomorrow morning and—" "He will come after us," my father interrupted, his voice low but firm. "You don't understand, Sarah. Claude isn't doing this just out of desire. He's doing it to control us, to have power over us. He has connections everywhere, in the police, in the mayor's office, in the newspapers. If we run, he'll find us, and it will be worse." "Worse than this?" My mother pointed at me, tears streaming down her face. "What could be worse than this, Anthony?" My father didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was laden with such deep shame that he could barely look at us. "He threatened," he muttered. "Said that if we tried anything, if we talked to anyone or tried to run, he would find a way to put you in jail, Sarah. Said he has friends who can plant evidence, false witnesses. And Teresa, he said he would send her to a special place he knows where no one would ever find her." A heavy silence fell over us. The reality of our situation, the web of power and corruption in which we were trapped, seemed to suffocate the very air in the room. "So that's it?" My mother finally spoke, her voice defeated. "We're just going to let him continue, doing what he's doing to our daughter? Until when, Anthony? Until he gets tired? Until she gets pregnant? Until she kills herself out of despair?" My father had no answer. None of us did. That night, after my parents finally fell asleep, my mother from pure exhaustion, my father helped by several shots of whiskey, I made a decision. If we couldn't escape together, I would escape alone. I would go far away, change my name, start a new life. Maybe, when I was safe, I could send for my mother. Careful not to make noise, I took the bundle we had already prepared, added the little money that was in the food tin, and the only photo we had, an old portrait of my mother when she was young, before marriage. I was about to go out the door when I heard the sound of a car stopping in front of the house. I froze. It could only be one person. Claude entered without knocking, as if the house were his. He wore a robe over his pajamas, seemed to have left in a hurry. His normally controlled face was contorted with anger. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked, seeing my bundle. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to answer. How did he know? Who had told him about our plans? "Sheriff Blackwell called me today," he said, as if reading my thoughts. "Told me about the charming visit your mother made to the sheriff's office. Very brave of her, isn't it? Too bad courage isn't enough in this town." He approached, pulled the bundle from my hand and threw it on the floor. "You're not going anywhere," he whispered, his face so close to mine that I could smell his whiskey breath. "You belong to me now. Your father sold you, remember? And I always take care of what's mine." What happened next was the worst of all the abuse I had suffered. Claude's anger, fueled by the attempt to report him and escape, transformed what was already a nightmare into something even more brutal. This time, he didn't even bother to take me to his house. He did it right there, on the living room floor, while my parents slept in the next room, or pretended to sleep, perhaps, unable to confront the monster they had let into our lives. When he finally finished and left, I lay on the cold floor, feeling that something fundamental had broken inside me. Not just my body, but my will to fight, my hope, my very identity. That night, the girl I was, the cheerful, studious, dreamy Teresa, died. In her place, someone different was born. Someone who learned in the hardest way that the world is a cruel place, that the people who should protect us are often the ones who hurt us the most, and that justice rarely exists for the weak and poor. This new person, this survivor, would have to find other ways to resist, other ways to live in a world that seemed determined to destroy her. And that, my dear ones who are still accompanying me on this painful journey, is the story I will continue to tell. Because even in the darkest nights, even when it seems there is no way out, there is always a small light of hope. It took me decades to find that light, but I found it, and that's why I'm here today, sharing my story with you. At the edge of the precipice, hunger, desperation, and the search for help. That night marked a turning point in our family. Something that was already broken shattered completely, like a glass that falls to the floor and spreads into pieces so small they can never be put back together. The next morning, I woke up in the same place where I had been abused, the cold floor of our living room. My body hurt so much I could barely move. But the physical pain was almost a relief compared to what I felt inside. My mother found me there, curled up like a wounded animal. Without saying a word, she helped me up, took me to the wash basin in the yard, and with a gentleness that brought tears back to my eyes, washed me as if I were a baby. She washed the blood from my legs, the finger marks on my arms, the scratches on my back. As she washed, she cried silently, her tears mixing with the water in the basin. "We'll find a way, my daughter," she murmured, her voice choked. "I don't know how yet, but we'll find a way." My father didn't appear all day. I found out later that he had spent the day drinking at Mr. Jack's store, spending what little money we had, drowning his guilt in cheap whiskey. When he finally returned, late at night, he didn't even look at us. He went straight to the bedroom and locked himself in there. The following days were suffocatingly silent. My father avoided staying at home. My mother tried to regain her strength to return to work, and I existed. I no longer lived. I just existed, moving like a ghost through the house, doing the mechanical tasks, washing clothes, sweeping the floor, cooking what little we had. I stopped going to school. How could I face my classmates, my teachers, pretend I was a normal girl while carrying that terrible secret? A week after the failed escape attempt, Claude returned. He didn't come to get me this time. He came with another proposal, something even more disturbing. My father was at home, sober for the first time in days. My mother, now able to stand for longer, was trying to sew some clothes for others, work that earned little, but was what she could do in her debilitated state. Claude arrived in the late afternoon, driving his gleaming car. He entered without knocking, as if the house were his, and in a way, at that point, it was. He carried a leather folder under his arm, and an expression that mixed disdain and barely contained excitement. "Good afternoon, family," he said ironically. "I've come to bring news." He sat at the kitchen table without being invited. My mother got up, muttering that she was going to the bedroom, but Claude stopped her. "Stay, Sarah," he ordered. "What I have to say concerns all of you." Reluctantly, my mother sat back down. I huddled in a corner, trying to make myself invisible, while my father remained standing, leaning against the wall, his eyes lowered. "Things are changing," Claude began, opening his folder and taking out some papers. "The mayor is planning urban renewal. This whole area," he made a sweeping gesture, "will be expropriated in the coming months. They're going to build an industrial park here." My father raised his head, surprised. "Expropriated? You mean we'll have to leave?" "Exactly, Anthony. You and all the other families on this street. But don't worry." He smiled, a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You'll receive compensation. Not much, of course, considering the state of this place, but enough not to be on the street." "And when will this happen?" asked my mother, concern evident in her voice. "The official notices should arrive in about a month or so. But I, as the mayor's legal advisor, have advance access to this information." He paused, savoring the power he had over us. "I thought of finding a way to help you get better compensation. After all, we're family, aren't we?" That word, family, in his mouth sounded like a profanation. I clenched my fists, feeling a hatred I had never experienced before. "What do you want in exchange this time?" asked my father, his voice low but laden with bitterness. Claude smiled again, that smile that gave me chills. "Well, since you asked, I have a new agreement to propose." He took more papers from the folder, spreading them on the table. "Contracts, from what I could see from my position in the corner of the kitchen. I can guarantee that you receive triple the normal compensation amount," he explained. "With that money, you could buy a decent house in another neighborhood, maybe even open a small business. Sarah could get proper treatment without depending on public charity." He made a dramatic pause, looking at each of us before continuing. When his eyes met mine, I felt a chill run down my spine. "In exchange," he continued, "I want something more permanent than our previous arrangements." "What do you mean?" asked my father, though I suspected he already knew the answer. "I want Teresa to come live with me," said Claude, directly and without beating around the bush. "As my official ward, I'll take care of her education, her future. She'll have everything you could never give her. Good clothes, private school, maybe even college one day." My mother let out a strangled sound, as if someone had squeezed her throat. "Never," she managed to say, her voice trembling with anger. "I will never hand over my daughter to you, you monster." "I'm not asking for your permission, Sarah," Claude replied coldly. "I'm informing you how things are going to be. The decision is Anthony's, legally, and he has already proven to be a pragmatic man." My father seemed to have aged 10 years in a few minutes. His face was ashen, his shoulders bent under the weight of guilt and shame. "I can't," he muttered. "I've gone too far already. I can't simply Sell my daughter. But you already have, Anthony. Claude laughed, a sound without joy. You sold her the first time you accepted my money knowing what I wanted in return. Now I'm just proposing to formalize the agreement. The silence that followed was dense, suffocating. I trembled in my corner, unable to believe that my fate was being negotiated like this, as if I were a piece of land or a head of cattle. And if we refuse? My mother finally asked, her voice a little firmer. Claude shrugged, a studiedly casual gesture. Then you'll receive the minimum compensation, which will barely be enough to rent a shack worse than this one. And who knows what might happen after? Maybe Sheriff Blackwell will discover that you're involved in some illegal activity. Maybe Sarah will have a serious relapse and won't be able to get treatment at the public hospital. The threats, even veiled, were clear. He had the power to destroy what little remained of our lives. I'll give you a week to think about it, he concluded, collecting the papers and putting them back in the folder. I'm a reasonable man after all. Before leaving, he stopped beside me and ran his hand through my hair, a gesture of possession that made me stiffen with disgust and fear. See you soon, Teresa, he whispered, just for me. Very soon. When Claude left, the silence that remained was almost solid, palpable. My mother was crying silently, her hands covering her face. My father seemed like a statue, motionless, his eyes fixed on some distant point that only he could see. I felt strangely calm, a calmness that came not from acceptance, but from a kind of dissociation. As if I were observing everything from outside, as if that girl leaning against the kitchen wall wasn't really me, but a character in a sad story I was reading. In the days that followed, the tension at home was so thick you could almost cut it with a knife. My parents barely spoke to each other. My mother alternated between periods of silent crying and explosions of desperate anger. My father drank more than ever, coming home later and later, more and more destroyed. On the fourth day after Claude's visit, something unexpected happened. I was in the yard, hanging some clothes I had washed, when I heard a voice calling me from the other side of the fence. Psst, Teresa. It was Mrs. Jenkins, our neighbor, a lady in her 60s who lived alone in the house next door. She had always been kind to me, sometimes giving me fruit from her yard or a piece of cake when she made some. Come here, child, she called, waving discreetly. I looked back, making sure no one was watching, and approached the fence. I heard, she said, her voice low. The walls are thin, you know. I heard what that man has been doing to you. I froze. Our shameful secret exposed. I wanted to run, hide, deny everything. But something in Mrs. Jenkins's look, not pity, but a deep understanding, made me stay. Don't be ashamed, child, she continued. The shame is not yours. It's his and those who allowed it. Are you going to tell anyone? I asked, my voice trembling. She shook her head. It wouldn't help, would it? He has powerful friends. I tried once, many years ago, to report a man like him. No one believed me. Her eyes became distant for a moment, as if she were seeing something from the past. Then she focused on me again. But I can help you in another way, she said, taking a yellowed envelope from her apron pocket. I have a sister in Chicago. She has a boarding house for young women, a decent place. I wrote to her about you. She's willing to take you in. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. A way out, a possibility of escape that I hadn't even dared to imagine. But how would I get there? I don't have money for the ticket, and he'll look for me. I have a little money saved, Mrs. Jenkins replied. Not much, but enough for the ticket and a few weeks until you find work. And as for him looking for you, she lowered her voice even more. He can only look for someone who's alive, can't he? I looked at her, confused. She explained her plan, a plan she had elaborated after hearing, night after night, the horrors that happened in the house next door. A risky, desperate plan, but one that might work. There would be a fire, an accidental fire in our house, while my parents were away. The houses in the neighborhood, all old and dried-out wood, would catch fire easily. They would find a body, the body of a homeless woman Mrs. Jenkins knew, a woman without family who lived on the streets and who was about my size. The homeless woman was already dead, Mrs. Jenkins explained. She had died of cold the night before, behind the church. No one would miss her. No one would claim her. Fire destroys everything, said Mrs. Jenkins, with a certainty that frightened me. After a strong fire, it's almost impossible to identify a body. They'll assume it's you, and you'll be on the bus to Chicago, starting a new life. The idea was so absurd, so extreme, that my first impulse was to refuse. Fake my own death? Let everyone believe I had died burned? Abandon my mother forever? But then I thought of the alternative. Living as Claude's property, under his roof, under his total control, suffering daily abuse with no hope of escape or rescue. The idea was unbearable. And my mother? I asked, my heart tight. She'll suffer thinking I'm dead. Mrs. Jenkins sighed, her eyes full of an old sadness. Yes, she will suffer. But she'll suffer less believing you died than knowing you're alive and in that man's hands. And who knows, one day when it's safe, you might be able to contact her. I spent the night awake, thinking about Mrs. Jenkins's proposal. It was madness, of course, a plan that could go terribly wrong in 1,000 different ways. But the alternative, going to live with Claude, was not an option. It was a death sentence in life. The next morning, I sought out Mrs. Jenkins and said I accepted her plan. She nodded without surprise, as if she already knew my answer. Tomorrow, she said. Your father leaves early to look for work, and your mother goes to the clinic to get medicine. The house will be empty for at least 2 hours. That's enough time. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I secretly packed the few things I would take: 2 changes of clothes, my mother's portrait, a small crucifix that had belonged to my grandmother. The rest I would leave behind, along with my name, my identity, my stolen childhood. The night before the escape, my parents had another terrible argument. The worst of all. My father, drunk as usual, said that perhaps we should accept Claude's proposal. At least she would have a better life, he shouted, the words slurred by whiskey. What can we offer her? Misery? Hunger? A better life? My mother shouted back, her voice hoarse from so much crying. Being abused every day by that monster? That's a better life for you, Anthony? At least she would have food on the table, clothes on her back, good school. And at what price? At the price of her body, Anthony, of our daughter's body. The argument continued, escalating to levels of anger and desperation I had never seen before. At one point, my mother grabbed a knife, threatening my father. If you hand her over to that demon, she said, her voice dangerously calm now, I swear to God I'll kill you, and then I'll kill myself. I won't live knowing I allowed this. My father, even drunk, realized the seriousness of the threat. He backed down, muttering incoherent apologies, and fell on the sofa, where he soon fell asleep. But something in the argument had changed my mother. When she came to see me in the bedroom later, her eyes were different, no longer defeated, but lit with a fierce determination. We're going to run away, she whispered, sitting on the edge of my bed. Tomorrow, while your father is out, we'll take a bus as far away as possible. My heart raced. It was almost the same plan I had with Mrs. Jenkins, but with one crucial difference. My mother would come with me. I wouldn't need to fake my death. I wouldn't need to abandon her. Where to? I asked, a mixture of hope and fear overwhelming me. I have a cousin in Missouri, she replied. It's been years since we spoke, but she would give us shelter for a while. It's far enough that he wouldn't find us easily. The idea of escaping with my mother, of not being alone on this terrible journey, was so tempting that I almost told her about Mrs. Jenkins's plan. But something held me back, an instinct perhaps, or the fear that the more people knew, the greater the risk of Claude finding out. Let's sleep now, my mother said, kissing my forehead. Tomorrow will be a long day. I slept a restless sleep, full of nightmares where Claude chased me through endless labyrinths, always one step away from catching me. I woke up to the sound of my father leaving, even before dawn. My mother was already up, preparing a quick coffee. Eat, she said, placing a piece of bread in front of me. We need strength for the journey. As we ate, she explained the plan. We would first go to the clinic as if she were going to get her medicine. From there, we would take a bus to the bus station in the neighboring town, larger and with more travel options. We would use the money she had hidden, her savings from years of work as a washerwoman, kept in a can buried in the yard. It was a good plan. Simple, direct, with real chances of success, and it involved staying with my mother, the only person who had tried to protect me, even in her fragility. But then, the unthinkable happened. We were almost ready to leave when we heard the sound of a car stopping in front of the house. My mother ran to the window and let out a strangled sound of despair. "It's him," she said, her face pale with terror. "It's Claude." My blood froze. How did he know? Who had told him about our plans this time? "Quick!" My mother pushed me toward the bedroom. "Hide under the bed. Don't come out no matter what you hear." I obeyed, squeezing into the tight space under my parents' double bed. I had barely settled when I heard the front door being opened violently. "Where is she?" Claude's voice, normally controlled, was altered by an anger I had never heard before. "Who?" My mother tried to disguise, but the fear was evident in her voice. "Don't play dumb, Sarah. I know you're planning to run. Where is Teresa?" "I don't know what you're talking about," my mother insisted. "Teresa went to school." A cruel laugh followed this obvious lie. "School? She hasn't been to school for weeks. Everyone knows that." I heard heavy footsteps crossing the living room, entering the kitchen, coming back. "I'm going to ask one more time." Claude's voice was dangerously calm now. "Where is Teresa?" The silence that followed was so tense I could barely breathe. Then, my mother's voice, firm despite the fear, "Far from you, where you'll never be able to touch her again." The sound of a slap cut through the air, followed by a dull thud. My mother falling, probably. I bit my lip not to scream, tears silently streaming down my face. "You ungrateful bitch," Claude was shouting now. "After everything I did for you, saved your miserable life with the medicine I paid for, and this is how you thank me?" The sounds that followed were the most terrible I had ever heard. My mother being beaten, objects breaking, muffled screams. I was shaking so much I thought the bed above me would shake too, revealing my hiding place. "Where is she?" Claude was yelling between blows. "Not going to say," my mother responded, her voice getting weaker and weaker. Then, the worst sound of all, a sharp scream, cut off halfway, followed by absolute silence. The silence extended for a time that seemed like an eternity. I heard slow footsteps walking through the house, doors being opened and closed, furniture being moved, Claude looking for me, methodically. When the footsteps approached the bedroom where I was hiding, I held my breath. I saw his expensive shoes stopping beside the bed, just inches from my face. He stood there, motionless, for an endless time. Then, he let out a frustrated sigh and left. I heard the front door slamming, the car engine starting, the sound of tires on the dirt as he drove away. Even so, I remained motionless, too terrified to come out. Only when the silence became unbearable did I finally crawl out of my hiding place. What I saw in the living room made me fall to my knees, a silent scream frozen in my throat. My mother was lying on the floor, amid broken furniture and shards of dishes. Her face was unrecognizable, swollen and covered in blood. But the worst was the handle of a knife, our kitchen knife, protruding from her chest, the blade completely buried, the pool of blood slowly spreading on the dirt floor. I crawled to her, unable to believe what I was seeing. I touched her face, called her name, begged her to respond. But I knew, with a terrible certainty, that she was gone. She had died protecting my secret, refusing to reveal my whereabouts even under torture. I don't know how long I stayed there, hugging my mother's body, crying until I had no more tears. It was Mrs. Jenkins who found me like that, hours later. She had come to check why we hadn't followed through with the plan. "Dear Lord," she muttered, seeing the scene. Then, with a presence of mind that I only understood much later, she quickly closed the door behind her and knelt beside me. "Teresa," she called, gently shaking my shoulders. "Teresa, look at me." I raised my eyes, unable to speak, still clinging to my mother's body. "You need to get out of here," she said, her voice urgent but gentle. "Now, before he comes back, before your father comes back." "I can't leave her," I managed to say, my voice hoarse from so much crying. "She's already gone, child," Mrs. Jenkins replied, with infinite compassion in her eyes. "Gone to protect you. Don't waste that sacrifice." With a firm gentleness, she separated me from my mother's body, took me to her house through the back, where no one could see us. There, she helped me wash, gave me clean clothes, and while I was in shock, changed the entire plan. "We can no longer fake your death," she explained, while preparing a larger bundle with clothes, food, and money. "Now you're a real fugitive. Claude will look for you for murder." "Murder?" I repeated, not understanding. "He'll say you killed your mother," explained Mrs. Jenkins, with a cruel lucidity. "He'll make up some story, that you fought, that you went crazy, and the authorities will believe him, because that's what they always do." The injustice was so absurd, so complete, that I couldn't even react. I just let Mrs. Jenkins guide me, following her instructions mechanically, like a doll without a will of its own. She led me along dirt paths behind the houses to the road that left town. There we waited hidden among bushes until a cargo truck passed. "That man," she pointed to the driver, "is my nephew. He'll take you to the bus station in Louisville. From there, you take a bus to Chicago. My sister will be waiting." Before saying goodbye, I asked the only thing that still mattered to me. "And my father? What will happen to him?" Mrs. Jenkins sighed, her eyes full of an old sadness. "I don't know, child. Maybe he'll find the courage he never had and report Claude. Maybe he'll surrender to drink completely. Or maybe—" She didn't complete the sentence, but she didn't need to. We both knew that my father could be Claude's next victim. With a heart heavy as lead, I climbed into the truck. The driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, asked no questions. He just nodded to Mrs. Jenkins and started driving. As the truck moved away, I looked one last time at the place that had been my home. The small houses in the distance, the red dust of the road, the immense Kentucky sky. I was leaving behind not just a place, but an entire life. A stolen childhood, a murdered mother, a father destroyed by guilt and weakness. I was 11 years old and already carried scars that most people don't accumulate in a lifetime. But as the truck gained speed on the dirt road, a certainty grew inside me, like a small flame that refuses to go out. I would survive, for my mother, who gave her life to protect me. I would survive, and one day somehow make Claude pay for what he had done. What I didn't know then was how long that revenge would take to arrive, and the terrible price I would still pay along the way. The journey to Chicago was a blur of fear and exhaustion. I remember Mrs. Jenkins's nephew leaving me at the Louisville bus station, giving me an envelope with money and a note with her sister's address in Chicago. I remember buying the ticket with trembling hands, huddling in the back of the bus, afraid that at any moment the police would enter looking for a murderous girl. I remember the rumble of the engine, the landscapes passing by the window, an America I didn't even know existed beyond the limits of my small town. It was almost 2 days of travel. I couldn't sleep, just dozed, and woke up startled, always looking over my shoulder. At each bus stop, my heart raced. With each new passenger who entered, I shrank more, pulling the scarf Mrs. Jenkins had given me to better cover my face. When we finally arrived at the Chicago bus station, I almost fainted. I had never seen so many people, so many noises, so many lights. It was a completely different world from my small town in Kentucky. How would I find Mrs. Jenkins' sister in that human anthill? But she found me. Mrs. Olga was there, holding a sign with my name, my real name, which made me panic for a moment, until I realized that no one in Chicago would be looking for Teresa Alves Collins from Ashland. She was a robust woman, with gray hair and a stern but kind look. "Come, child," she said, taking my small bundle. "You're safe now." Safe, a word that had lost its meaning for me. How could I be safe anywhere when the very monster who was chasing me was from my family, was the respectable lawyer everyone admired? Mrs. Olga's boarding house was in a working-class neighborhood of the city. It was an old 2-story house with small but clean rooms, rented mainly to young women who came from the countryside to work in the textile factories. I was installed in a small room in the attic, with a window that faced the back of the house and a narrow but comfortable bed. The first real bed I could call my own. "You'll stay here until you get established," explained Mrs. Olga. "My sister told me a bit about your situation. You don't need to talk about it if you don't want to. No one asks questions here. In the first few days, I barely left the room. Fear was a constant companion, along with guilt for being alive while my mother was dead, and shame for what had happened to me. The nights were the worst. Nightmares woke me up screaming, scaring the other residents. Mrs. Olga started giving me a tea before bed, something bitter that helped keep the bad dreams away. After 2 weeks, she knocked on my door with a proposal. "You can't keep hiding forever, child," she said, with that direct frankness that reminded me of her sister. "You need to start living again, and to live, you need to work." She had a cousin who owned a bakery in the neighborhood. He needed help cleaning the hall and washing the pans. It didn't pay much, but it was a start. And, more importantly, he didn't ask questions about documents or past. "But what if he finds me?" I asked, expressing for the first time the fear that was consuming me inside. Mrs. Olga sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes showing an understanding that came from her own experience. "Chicago is a huge city, Teresa. Millions of people. It's easy to disappear here. And besides," she hesitated, as if measuring her words, "besides, you're not the same girl anymore. You're growing, changing. In a few years, even if he saw you on the street, he might not recognize you." She was right, I realized, looking at myself in the small, cracked mirror in the room. At just 11 years old, I already looked much older. My eyes had lost their childish sparkle. My face had lines of worry that shouldn't be there. Soon, the girl Teresa would completely disappear, giving way to a woman forged in pain. I accepted the job at the bakery. I would get up at 4 in the morning, still dark, and walk hurriedly through the empty streets to Mr. Manuel's bakery, Mrs. Olga's cousin. There, I would wash pans, clean the floor, serve coffee to workers who passed by before the factory. It was hard work, but honest, and little by little, it gave me a feeling I had lost long ago, that of being a person, not an object. Mr. Manuel was a rough but fair Portuguese immigrant. He paid on time, never treated me badly, and as promised, never asked questions about my past. When he needed my documents to register me as an employee, Mrs. Olga provided them. I didn't ask how, nor did I want to know. I became Mary Connie Smith, born in Pikeville, Kentucky. A clean slate, no past, no history. Months passed, then years. Gradually, the open wound in my chest began to form a scab. It didn't heal completely, it never would, but it no longer bled constantly. I made some friends at the boarding house, other young women who, like me, carried their own secrets. No one asked too much. We were all survivors in our own way. At 14, I was already working at the bakery counter, serving customers. I had learned to disguise my Kentucky accent, to dress like the girls from the big city, to blend into the anonymous crowd on the streets of Chicago. I attended night school, as Mr. Manuel insisted that I needed to at least complete elementary school. At first, I resisted. I was afraid that somehow enrolling in a school might leave clues for Claude. But Mrs. Olga assured me that with my new documents, it was impossible for them to track me down. And so, slowly, I rebuilt some kind of life. I wasn't happy. Happiness seemed a distant, almost abstract concept, but I was alive. I worked, studied, saved every penny I could. Deep in my mind, I always knew that one day I would return to Kentucky. Not to stay, but to settle scores. When I turned 18, I was already manager of the bakery. Mr. Manuel was getting old and trusted me to take care of the accounts, purchases, practically everything. He paid me well, and I had saved up a small nest egg. It was then that I received the first news from Ashland since my escape. It was a letter from Mrs. Jenkins, sent through her sister. I opened it with trembling hands, my heart racing. The thin paper was covered with a shaky handwriting from someone who wasn't used to writing. "Dear child," the letter began, "I hope this finds you well and safe. I have news you need to know. Your father passed away 2 months ago. He drank himself to death after your mother's death and ended up drowning in the creek during a flood. As for the other matter, he continues to prosper. He's now a judge. Imagine that, a man like that dispensing justice. The world is upside down. Many people still talk about you here. They say you killed your mother and ran away. I know it's not true, but that's what he spread. I hope you're building a new life there. Don't come back. There's nothing for you here but pain. With love, Jay." I read and reread that letter so many times that the paper began to fall apart at the folds. My father dead. Claude, a judge, and I, a fugitive murderer in the memory of the town. That night, I cried as I hadn't cried since the first days in Chicago. I cried for my father, who despite his weakness, his cowardice, had been good to me before Claude entered our lives. I cried for my mother, whose grave I could never visit. I cried for the girl I had been, for the lost innocence, for the destroyed family. But when the tears dried, something different had taken their place. A cold, calculated resolution. Claude was a judge now, powerful, respected, while I, his victim, lived in hiding under a false name, carrying the stigma of a crime I didn't commit. That wasn't right. It couldn't continue like this. But how to confront him? He had the entire system on his side, the police, the courts, the society that respected men in suits and despised poor girls. I needed a plan, allies, evidence. In the following years, this plan slowly took shape. I continued working at the bakery, but I began to frequent the public library in my spare time. I read everything I could about laws, about how the judicial system worked. I began to understand how men like Claude operated, how they protected themselves, what their weak points were. At 22, I met Joe, a young man who delivered flour to the bakery. He was a few years older, quiet, hard-working. We started talking during his deliveries, then going out together on my days off. He was gentle, respectful, never tried anything that made me uncomfortable. With him, I learned that not all men were like Claude. After a year of dating, he asked me to marry him. I hesitated, not because I didn't like him, but because I had never told him my secret. He knew Mary Connie, not Teresa. How could I marry someone who didn't know who I really was? One night, I took courage and told him everything. About Ashland, about my father and mother, about Claude and the abuse, about the escape, about the new identity. I expected him to back away, disgusted, frightened. But Joe just held my hands, his eyes full of tears. "This explains so many things," he said softly. "The nightmares, the fear I see in your eyes sometimes, the way you flinch when someone raises their voice." He hugged me, and for the first time in many years, I felt truly safe in someone's arms. "We'll make him pay," Joe promised. "I don't know how yet, but we'll find a way." We got married in a small registry office, with only Mrs. Olga and Mr. Manuel as witnesses. Joe sold the small farm he had inherited from his father on the outskirts of Chicago, and with that money, plus my savings, we bought Mr. Manuel's bakery, who wanted to retire and return to Portugal. The following years were of hard work, but also of planning. Joe had a friend who worked as a reporter for a small newspaper. Through him, we began to follow news from Kentucky, especially about Claude, now a respected judge who presented himself as a candidate for mayor of Ashland. Meanwhile, our family grew. We had 2 children, Charlie, our firstborn, and then Sarah, whom I named in honor of my mother. Raising them was both a joy and a challenge. Each milestone, the first tooth, the first steps, the first word, was a celebration, but also a painful reminder of the childhood that was stolen from me. It was difficult to be a good mother when I never had an example of how a normal family worked. I had a constant fear that something bad would happen to my children, that I wouldn't be able to protect them as my mother couldn't protect me. Sometimes I was overprotective, other times distant, fighting with my own demons. Joe was my rock during those years. Patient, understanding, always there when the nightmares came, when the memories became too strong. He understood that there were parts of me that might never heal completely, and loved me anyway. In 1972, when I turned 30, I received another letter from Mrs. Jenkins. She was sick, she wrote, and didn't expect to live much longer. Before departing, she wanted to see me one last time. She gave precise instructions on how to reach her niece's house in Columbus, where she was living. It was closer than Ashland, she wrote, and safer for me. I hesitated. I hadn't left Chicago since my arrival. The idea of traveling, of exposing myself, terrified me, but I owed so much to Mrs. Jenkins. It was she who saved my life, who made my escape possible, who gave me a second chance. Joe insisted that we should go, all of us. It would be safer to travel as a family, he said. No one would look for a married woman with 2 children after so many years. The trip to Columbus was tense. Each bus stop, each person who looked in our direction left me in panic. But we arrived without incidents. Mrs. Jenkins' niece, a kind woman named Patricia, received us with affection. Mrs. Jenkins was very changed. The strong, decisive woman I had known was now confined to a bed, consumed by a cancer that was robbing her of her strength, but her eyes still had the same vivacity, the same determination. "You've grown up, child," she said when we were alone. "Become a beautiful woman." I held her wrinkled hand, swallowing tears. "Thanks to you. I can never thank you enough." She shook her head, dismissing my gratitude. "I did what any decent person would do. And besides," she smiled weakly, "I had my own scores to settle with men like your brother." She then told me something she had never revealed before, that like me, she had been abused in childhood by an uncle, a respected man in the community, who never paid for his crimes. "That's why I understood your suffering, child. And that's why I couldn't stand by watching it happen again." We talked for hours. I told her about my life in Chicago, about Joe, about my children. She listened to everything attentively, occasionally asking questions, her eyes shining with satisfaction at knowing that I had managed to build some kind of life after the horror. When I was about to leave, she held my arm with a surprising strength for someone so sick. "He's still there, you know? More powerful than ever. Going to be mayor, they say. Maybe even congressman one day." Her eyes narrowed. "Men like him never stop. There must be other girls after you, other lives destroyed." A chill ran down my spine. Of course there would be others. How had I not thought of this before? Claude wouldn't stop just because I had escaped. His type of evil was insatiable. "What can I do?" I asked, more to myself than to her. "No one would believe me. He's a judge, I'm nobody." Mrs. Jenkins smiled, a smile that reminded me of many years ago, when she explained her plan to get me out of Ashland. "There's one thing I've learned in life, child. Everyone has secrets, especially powerful men. Secrets they would give anything to keep hidden." She took a yellowed envelope from under her pillow. "Take this. I've kept it all these years, waiting for the right moment." Inside the envelope was a black and white photograph, yellowed at the edges. It showed Claude much younger, in uniform, alongside other equally uniformed men. "Your brother served in the border battalion during the war," explained Mrs. Jenkins. "There was an incident, something involving Italian civilians. It was hushed up, of course, but there are still living witnesses. People who, like you, keep their stories, waiting for the right moment to tell them." I looked at the photograph, then at Mrs. Jenkins, confused. "How do you know this?" She smiled again. "My late husband was in the military, served with your brother, saw things, heard stories that would make me even more disgusted, if that were possible. Stories that your brother would pay any price to keep hidden, especially now that he wants to enter politics." When we returned to Chicago, I had not only the photograph, but also names. 3 men who had served with Claude, who had witnessed the incident. One of them, according to Mrs. Jenkins, now lived in Chicago. We began our search. Joe used his contacts, asked around, investigated. It took months, but we finally located Jarvis Taylor, former sergeant, now the owner of a bar in the South Side. At first, he refused to talk. The fear in his eyes when we mentioned Claude was palpable, but Joe was persuasive, and after several visits, several conversations, he finally began to open up. The incident had actually been a massacre. A family of Italian immigrants unjustly accused of collaborating with the Axis. Claude, then a young lieutenant, had ordered the execution, men, women, even children. Afterward, he falsified reports, threatened witnesses, made sure the story never came to light. "Why did you never report it?" I asked Jarvis, horrified by what I had heard. He laughed, a bitter sound. "Report to whom, ma'am? To the same military that covered everything up? To the politicians who support men like him? Besides," he lowered his voice, "he has evidence against all of us. Photos, documents that incriminate us, too. We all had our hands tied, but I wasn't." Slowly, a plan began to form in my mind. A risky, dangerous plan that could cost me everything I had built, but which, if it worked, would finally bring some form of justice. I spent the next few months gathering evidence. Jarvis, reluctantly, provided names, dates, places. Joe used his contacts at the newspaper to discreetly investigate, confirm details. We found other witnesses: a doctor who had treated the few survivors, a priest who had tried to intervene. And then, in early 1974, when Claude officially announced his candidacy for mayor of Ashland, we decided it was time to act. It wasn't easy. I had to leave my children with Mrs. Olga, promise Joe that I would be careful, overcome my own terror of returning to the town where I had lost everything. But the idea of Claude gaining even more power, perhaps reaching a position where he could harm even more people, was unbearable. I arrived in Ashland on a hot August morning. The town had changed, grown, modernized. But for me, every corner still held memories. Every unfamiliar face could be someone who would recognize me, who would shout, "The murderer is back." I stayed at a small boarding house on the outskirts, using a false name. For days I just observed, gathered information. Claude had a campaign office downtown. Every day he received supporters, made speeches, promised a bright future for the town. No one seemed to see the monster behind the polished smile, the well-cut suit. Finally, on a night when I knew he would be alone in the office, information obtained from the building janitor through a generous tip, I decided to confront him. I entered through the back door, my heart beating so hard I thought I would faint. So many years of nightmares, of fear, of pent-up anger, and now I was just a few feet away from him. When I opened the office door, he was sitting at his desk, reviewing some papers. He looked up, annoyed by the interruption. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" He didn't recognize me. Of course not. The skinny, frightened 11-year-old girl had transformed into a 32-year-old woman, with lines of expression and an iron determination in her gaze. "Don't you recognize me, Claude?" I asked, my voice surprisingly firm. "It's me, Teresa." I saw the color drain from his face. He stood up abruptly, knocking over the chair. "Teresa, but you're dead. Or you ran away after killing your mother." "We both know who killed my mother," I replied, taking a step forward. "The same man who abused an 11-year-old girl, the same one who now wants to be mayor." He quickly regained his composure. The initial shock gave way to the same cold, calculating smile that I knew so well. "No one will believe you," he said, walking around the desk to get closer to me. "I'm a respected judge. You're a fugitive. A murderer." I took the envelope I had brought with me from my pocket. I spread its contents on the desk. Copies of testimonies, Mrs. Jenkins' photograph, documents that Jarvis had provided. "I didn't come here for them to believe me," I explained calmly. "I came for them to believe them. The witnesses of what you did during the war. The survivors." I saw his face change, fear replacing arrogance. He picked up the papers with trembling hands, leafing through them quickly. "Where did you get this? Who else knows?" "Many people," I lied. "Journalists, lawyers. If anything happens to me, this information goes directly to every newspaper in the country." It was a bluff, of course. We had copies stored, but we didn't have contacts with major newspapers, nor certainty that anyone would publish the story. But he didn't know that. "What do you want?" he finally asked, his voice reduced to a whisper. "Money?" I shook my head. "I want you to drop out of the race, today, to announce your retirement as a judge, to disappear from public life forever." He laughed, a bitter sound. "You're asking me to destroy my life, like you destroyed mine," I responded, without emotion. "The difference is that I'm giving you a choice, more than you gave me." What followed was a tense negotiation that lasted hours. He tried to intimidate me, then buy me off, then convince me he had changed. I remained firm. In the end, when the sun was already beginning to rise, he agreed to my terms. The next day, to the shock of the entire town, Claude announced his withdrawal from the electoral race and his retirement from the judiciary, citing health problems. Within weeks, he had sold his house in Ashland and moved to Miami, where, I later learned, he lived in seclusion. I returned to Chicago with an enormous weight lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't complete justice. He would never legally pay for his crimes, never go to jail for the abuse, for my mother's murder. But at least he had lost his power, his ability to continue harming others. In the years that followed, I slowly rebuilt not just my life, but my identity. Gradually, Mary Connie gave way to Teresa again, not the innocent girl from before, but a new version, forged through pain and overcoming. I told my story to my children when they got older, so they would understand where they came from, who their mother really was. It was difficult, painful, but also liberating. I no longer needed to live in the shadow of fear, under the weight of the secret. Our bakery prospered, becoming famous for my cakes and cookies, recipes I vaguely remembered seeing my mother make. When my children grew up and took their own paths, Joe and I decided to move. Not to Ashland, I could never live there again, but to a nearby town, where the climate reminded me of my childhood. In 1998, Joe passed away peacefully in his sleep. I was 56, still young enough to start over, but with no desire to do so. I had loved only one man in my life, and that was enough for me. Instead, I dedicated myself to a new mission. With the money from the sale of the bakery, I founded a small organization to help children and adolescents who were victims of abuse. A safe place where they could tell their stories, receive support, learn that they weren't alone, that they weren't to blame for what they had suffered. I called it Sarah's House, in honor of my mother, who gave her life to protect me. Over the years, hundreds of children passed through there. Some managed to rebuild their lives, as I had done. Others still struggled with their demons. All had a safe place to stay, people who believed in them, who understood their suffering. In 2007, I received news that put the final period on my story with Claude. He had died alone in his apartment in Miami. He had left no family, friends, no one to claim his body. According to the local newspaper that reported his death almost as a footnote, he had become a recluse, an alcoholic, obsessed with the idea that he was being persecuted. I felt no joy at the news, nor pity, just a strange emptiness, as if a very long and painful chapter of a book had finally come to an end. And so, my dear ones who have accompanied me this far on this painful journey, I come to the end of my story. Today, at 82 years old, I look back and see a life that, despite all the scars, was worth living. I had love, I had family, I had purpose. I survived what many would not survive and transformed my pain into help for others. If you've come this far with me, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. It's not easy to hear stories like this, just as it's not easy to tell them. But it's necessary. Silence protects only the abusers, never the victims. If this story touched your heart, I ask that you subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and share with someone who might need to hear that it's possible to survive even the worst horrors. Remember always, your story doesn't end with trauma. What they did to you is just one chapter, not the entire book. You have the power to write the next chapters, and they can be more beautiful and meaningful than you ever imagined. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for witnessing. Thank you for remembering. With love, Miss Terry the Baker.